Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. We get you ready for the NBA draft, which is next week. Wednesday, round 1, Thursday, round 2. Jim Eichenhofer and Gus Kattengell with you. We got a fun show lined up for you. Guillory is going to talk about a pair of prospects for you here as well. Derik Queen and Egor Demin, I think, is how you say it.
I believe that's correct.
I believe so.
Although I think when you hear the episode, you're going to hear Will and I both use multiple pronunciations. So
it is what it is.
Whatever you want, whatever your preference is.
That's how it works. The other thing is as well, we're going to talk to Jason Smith, former Pels player, now part of the Washington Wizards television studio. He's an analyst. He's incredible. He's going to kind of tell you maybe what Washington's trying to do. And Jim, we've talked about this before. It's a very interesting first 7, right? Mm-hmm. Utah and Washington are not teams that have been contending or pushing for a play-in spot or a playoff spot.
Or Charlotte, too, probably put in that category.
Well, yep. Didn't Charlotte?
They made the play-in a couple years ago.
That's what I mean. So, But for the most part, everybody else has a star or two or have been in the playoffs. Dallas was in the finals the year before.
Right.
Injuries affected that. I would put the Pels in there as well. Washington's different, right? They had Bradley Beal. He finally moved on. They're trying to find an identity, a star, a face of the franchise, things of that nature. So it is interesting to look at them. When you look at Washington, where they are in the East and overall in the NBA, how do you summarize them?
I think they're just going to try to compile as much talent as they can and figure out how it all fits together later. But I think their number one mission right now is to just get some foundation pieces. I don't think they necessarily have one guy that you can say like, okay, this is the guy that we're going to build around, but they might be able to get that in the draft. And I think if there is somebody at 6 when their turn comes up that they see as a pillar to the future, I think that'll be the guy that they take. But yeah, it is interesting just as we head into the draft next week that obviously people are going to keep a close eye on, Utah's picking 5th, Washington's picking 6th. So which players are those two teams going to take? And then that'll leave what's available for the Pelicans, obviously, at 7.
All right, here's our conversation with Jason Smith, and then we will chat with Will Guillory right here in the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. All right, we have gotten down to the final team before the New Orleans Pelicans select at least first in the first round, as they have 2 first-round picks as we get closer to the NBA draft on the 25th and 26th. The Washington Wizards have the 6th pick in the first round. Mr. Jason Smith, is it infamous, the famous, the all-knowing,
legendary, I would say,
legendary Jason Smith from back in the day, now part of their television broadcast here as well, joins us. He joined us during the season last year. Man, always a pleasure to see you. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm enjoying summertime. The kids have yet to get out of school. They got one more day, and then it's going to be a lot of fun and sun in the pool.
I tell you, people down here don't realize, I'm from New York, they don't realize the school year is much later up in the north and the mid-Atlantic than it is down here. I mean, they've been out of school for weeks at this point down here. So there you go.
Yeah. If my kids could actually get out of school at that time, they'd have a blast. But we have one more day. It's going to be a very long summer, hopefully fun in the sun, and I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. We brought you in to talk about the Wizards, obviously. I guess we could start with, they're coming off a season where they won 18 games. The season before that was 15 wins. They're kind of at the very initial stages of a rebuild. What was your biggest takeaway from this past season in terms of the development that they're going through right now with their young guys?
Well, first, you said 15 games last season, which was not fun to watch. But then coming off of this season, 18 games, hey, you're saying there's room for improvement?
Definitely.
It is one of those years, though, that it was a struggle to kind of figure out what's going on with the team, what's going on with the organization. But taking a positive out of it, a lot of the young guys got an opportunity to play out there, and you got to see a lot of them going into the Rising Stars Challenge for All-Star Week, but that was because they had the opportunity to go out there and show themselves and prove themselves. So with this young core group, I think they're going to add another piece coming into this draft to add on to that core group and hopefully build and grow together as the years come along.
What did you see from, I mean, they were not many teams in the league that played rookies as much as they did. I know that was kind of the plan going in, though, that they were going to try to get as much experience as they could for their rookies. Between Alex Sarr, Bub Carrington, and Keyshawn George, I mean, what were some of the things that you saw from them that were encouraging in their first season in the league?
Well, you take it from every perspective. Every single one of them made progress as the season went along. Alex Sarr, he came into the league. He had a struggle going into summer league. He was a little bit of a wild card, but as the number 2 pick, you knew that he was going to get plenty of opportunities to go out there and play on the floor. A guy that really surprised me was Bub Carrington. Coming out of Pittsburgh, he was known as having that competitive fighting spirit, and he showed nothing but the same when he got to the league. And to see him go out there and have success and compete for minutes, whether it was starting or coming off the bench, there was a lot of fluid lineups out there, but he excelled in every part of the game, whether it was coming off the bench, being ready, engaged in defensive assignments, making sure not to be too starstruck. He was very candid in his interviews, which as media people, we absolutely appreciate. But he was going out there against his star and his idol, Kyrie Irving, and we even got some mic'd up moments of him saying, "Oh my gosh, it's so nice to meet you." But that's the beauty of being a rookie. Now he's past that. He's gotten that experience. He's not going to have to worry about that next year. And that's something that you look forward to. But also, Keyshawn George, he was kind of the wild card of the Washington Wizards, because whenever he got out there, he made it look so easy. He was very smooth. It didn't look like he was trying very hard. Now, granted, in the beginning parts of the season, he struggled with his shot, as any rookie or any young player might occur in their first year. But as he got more and more reps, he knew that the coaching staff believed in him, the players believed in him, his teammates, the front office, and he ran with it. And you know what? He had a lot of success. He got snubbed for the Rising Stars game, but then got in because somebody was injured. So it just shows you, when you're given opportunity, this front office has hit on the picks that they've had so far, and hopefully they can continue to grow for years to come.
You just mentioned the front office. I think maybe for people who don't closely follow the Wizards, they might not necessarily be aware that we're talking about a group of guys that have an Oklahoma City background, that's where they came from. I mean, in general terms, is that kind of what the plan is, to try to do? I mean, obviously you want the success that the Thunder have, but is it going to be kind of that process where it's like you're building through the draft? You're probably going to try to make some other moves too here and there, but really it's going to just be about being patient and not rushing things.
I think so. I think they're doing a great job of being patient with the young guys, giving them opportunity to go out there and play, but also going into the draft, making sure to get yet another young, talented player. I mean, they were one of the worst teams in the league last year. They were expecting to be maybe a top 3 pick. That didn't pan out the way they expected, but you roll with the punches. They have a number 6 pick. There's a lot of opportunities for a lot of different players. Now, when you go out there and you have the top 3, things have kind of been mixed up a little bit in the last week or two of figuring out who's going to go top 10, who's going to go top 5. Obviously, I think we know the top 1, 2, possibly 3. But after that, it's kind of, you have a plethora of different players that could go in any different position.
Last thing for me, I was wondering, I'm not sure how much you've been able to drill down on, a lot of the first round picks and some of these guys that are expected to go pretty high. But I was wondering, who is the Jason Smith of this year's draft class?
Like
Who's the guy that reminds you the most of your game? Is there a smooth shooting big guy out there that just nails 18-footers all night?
Man, you know what? I can't even answer that because I've been so focused on the top 6 picks to try and figure out who the Wizards
Understandable.
might take.
Yeah,
I would have to, I would love to say Cooper Flagg, but he is much better than I was. He was just going all over the place. I mean, he's got a lot more talent than I ever had, but I have no idea in this year's draft who might be the next Jason Smith. That's a great question. I'll have to think about that and get back to you on that.
Maybe next time we talk to you, maybe later in the off season, or maybe when we talk to you during the season next year, you'll be able to say, "Hey, I watched this rookie class, and this is the Jason Smith that I have."
I'll be like, "Hey, Jim, I remember that question you asked me. I didn't have the answer then, but I dang sure got the answer now."
Yeah, along the lines of what Jim is saying too, Jason, I think one of the things that I've learned, I guess, through his process too, and as we've watched the playoffs this year and watched the 2 teams in the finals this year, whether it's the new CBA, whether it's whatever it is that the league's sort of trending, I almost feel like you need to really pay attention to the draft. It's almost coming back to, hey, you're gonna have to build basketball teams again. It's not 2 or 3 guys that can carry. Hey, we'll just put Jim, me on the rest of the team, and everybody else can do it, whether it's injuries
that
or whatever.
definitely wouldn't work.
No, right? I mean, you need bench guys. You need guys that can come in. It's a long season, but you're seeing that, and I kind of love that. It's like my dad is older than me. I turned 50, so it kind of gives you an idea where he's at. And he's like, all these threes, and it's all this. I'm like, Dad, it's coming. It's coming back, because the importance of building a team, first round, second round, players that come in through free agency. Don't you feel, Jason, that guys like you and other guys are becoming as important as they ever been? If not, hey, just because you're not in the top 3 and the top 6, you're probably not going to win a championship unless you have guys later on.
You absolutely are correct. And you look at the 2 teams that are in the finals with Indiana and Oklahoma City. Those are teams that people didn't necessarily, actually, 2 small market teams. Indiana wasn't necessarily supposed to be in the finals. Now, Oklahoma City in the Western Conference was just dominant as ever. But you take a look at their roster. 1 through 15, everybody's supporting each other. Everybody's going out there on a nightly basis and making sure that they play the right way on the defensive side of the basketball, first and foremost. And then on the offensive side of the basketball, when you have SGA and Williams, they're just going out there as a dynamic duo. And if somebody happens to shut them down, they have Dort, they have Hartenstein, they have so many different threats out there. But because they're such a young team and their draft picks, they've built their team the right way. And that's why when you come back to the Wizards, you're kind of taking that same ideology of trying to find a lot of young players that play within the system, playing for each other. And I think that if you're going through the NBA, it's not just putting maybe 3 people on a team and then, we fill in the spots. Now it's kind of going through a full 15-man roster of getting, all right, who's going to be our guy that's going to pick up 94 feet? Who's going to be our main 3-point threat? Who's going to be our point guard finding and assisting everybody on the floor? And who's going to be kind of that glue guy in the locker room? There's so many different options and availabilities on teams that you have to make sure that you fill those voids with the right people.
Yeah, and they're all important, aren't they? I mean, whether you look at the dynasties, the 30 for 30 episodes, the Jordan eras, whatever, all those guys from B.J. Armstrong, just as important as Scotty was in that era. I mean, honestly, pick a center, whether it's Luke Longley or any of those guys. I mean, we all saw them, and you have to have those guys. We saw it through the Spurs, the Lakers, 3-peats, all those different things. There's always going to be an Eichenhofer ready to spot from the corner for 3 or pick up the fence.
I'm more of the pick up 94 feet. Well, actually, not anymore. Maybe 15 years ago, I was picking up 94 feet, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, you did hear Jim's infamous story, though, in high school, right? Didn't we talk about that last time?
No.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, my infamous story is that I was kind of an end of the bench player at one point during my high school illustrious career. And I went in the game with like 2 minutes left, and the other team was up by 20, 25 points. And the coach for the other team just wanted to run out the clock. So I just started fouling people because I was like, I want to play. I don't want to sit here and watch you just dribble. So Gus has been on me ever since then, calling me like the hatchet man and the
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. You wanted to get your opportunity to play some basketball, and they were trying to take it away from you.
Yes, exactly.
Jason, if you're coaching, wouldn't you want that kind of tenacity, that kind of, it ain't over yet. It's not over until you hear the horn.
You got to take that literally, because think about the Indiana Pacers. They've been down by 15 points multiple times in this postseason, and they've come back to win games. So to see that desire to fight until the last buzzer, that is a rarity in the NBA. Now, if you can go out there and get 15 guys that'll do all the same thing in that tenacity spectrum, that's a tough team to beat.
I wish the opposing crowd had seen it that way. This was a road game for us, and mostly the result was me getting heckled by the opposing fans saying, "Can we please end this game? Why are you dragging this out, you idiot? You're going to lose." So anyways.
I love it. No, I'm serious. I have respect for them for that. I love that, Jason. But we'll see what happens, man. I'm with you. I think it is exciting, though. I think you will see, especially for fans of different teams, I like at least you starting in September and October, and you got a shot, right? Draft well, play well, coach well. You have a shot, as opposed to in years past, let's be honest. In October, it's going to be 2 to 4 teams that are going to go in there every year. So I think it's changing, and I think that's a good thing for the league if it's just me as we wrap up.
No, I absolutely agree. Because if you take a look at some of the best teams in the league, they kind of sputtered coming down towards the regular season and going into playoffs because it's tough to play an 82-game season and then on top of that playoffs where everything ratchets up intensity-wise. So you have injuries and everybody's playing with bruises and everybody's going out there and trying to fight the best that they possibly can. But if you have a bit of luck where you can have that luxury of saying, I don't have to play just 6, 7, 8 guys in my rotation on a nightly basis. If I can go deep into the bench in the regular season, get them experience, kind of figure out what I can really trust from them to go out there and do, whether it's rebounding, shooting, intensity, fouls, gym. I think there's an opportunity for a lot of different guys to go out there and find a niche on a team.
I love that.
Excellent. Yes, I was the enforcer.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. That's important.
When you met me the first time, you were like, this guy was definitely an enforcer in high school.
Intimidating. He came up to my waist, but he was intimidating.
Hated in one spot, loved in another. OKC loves them some Lou Dort, right? Maybe not so much here in New Orleans. But anyway, you know how it works. So television analyst for the Washington Wizards, Mr. Jason Smith, it's always a pleasure. We will talk to you during the season. Enjoy the draft. And enjoy the rest of your summer. We'll see you then.
Sounds good. Thanks, fellas.
All right, time now to continue getting you ready for the NBA draft. Don't forget, the 25th and 26th of June. That's a Wednesday, Thursday. First round, second round. Pels, the 7th pick overall, as Will Guillory from The Athletic rejoins us again. Jim Eichenhofer to talk about a couple of prospects here. We're going to talk about Derik Queen and Egor Demin here in a second. But Will, Pels made a move the week before the NBA draft that right now has them with an additional first-round pick. I guess let's kind of go over what Joe Dumars and his staff have done.
Yeah, they traded. They acquired Indiana's pick in 2026 as part of the Brandon Ingram trade, and they ended up just trading that pick back to Indiana in exchange for Indiana's pick in this year's draft, which is number 23. So now the Pelicans own the 7th and the 23rd pick in this year's draft. And it's funny because, you know, this is the first time the Pels have had multiple first-round picks since the first year David Griffin came to town, right, in the Zion Williamson draft, when they had 3 first-round picks that year. And I think it's a very similar notion here from Joe Dumars to kind of start off his tenure by building out the young foundation, bringing in his guys. We always talk about, you know, these execs bringing in players that reflect how they want to play, what they want the organization to look like. And I think, you know, it was a pretty smart move by the team to go get the 23rd pick, you know, basically saying, hey, we'll take the 23rd pick now because in all likelihood, the Pacers are probably going to have a worse pick than number 23 next year. Right. So why not just jump on the 23rd pick now? They feel pretty good about this draft. We've heard about them working out guys who are going to be in that 20 to 30 range. So why not? I think it was a pretty smart move by the Pels.
Not going to ask you to predict who the 23rd pick is going to be because that would be virtually impossible, but with the range of guys that could potentially go there. But, I mean, who are some of the names that you like in that part of the first round, maybe like in the 20s?
Initially, when I heard about the trade, I think 2 names that popped in my head immediately were Walter Clayton Jr., the point guard from Florida, obviously national champion, had a huge run during the NCAA tournament, a guy who can shoot the ball at an extremely high clip. A really talented player. I think a guy who's being slept on in this draft for sure. And also a guy, Danny Wolf from Michigan, a big guy who could play on the perimeter, could pass it, got high IQ. I'm a big fan of him and what he can do to kind of fit in, especially with the Pelicans and, you know, wanting to have perimeter-oriented bigs to play next to Zion Williamson. I think that'll be smart. And I think, you know, what those 2 guys have in common, and a few different guys in that 23 range are guys who have played multiple years in college, guys who are 21, 22, 23 years old. And those are guys that we've seen the Pelicans have success with in the past, right? Drafting guys like Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Najee Marshall, Jose Alvarado. We can go down the list. Mm-hmm. They've done a really good job of finding these guys who have some experience at the college level, and they kind of understand who these guys are, what their role is going to be in the NBA. And I think that those are the type of guys I would try to target, you know, in that 23 range, somebody who you can bring in and they know exactly who they are, how they can play on this team, and you can find some you know, additional depth, because I think that's what this team is kind of missing right now, those guys who can come off the bench that can give them reliable minutes.
For the two players that we're going to talk about today, I guess we can start with Derik Queen. He's definitely not a player that has any chance based on the mock drafts to fall, too far down the first round. He's definitely not going to be still on the board when we get to the 20s. Right now, NBA.com has him as the 9th pick in their consensus mock draft. What do you see from him in terms of how this guy has become somebody who it looks like most people are projecting is going to be in the single digits somewhere of the draft?
Yeah, I just mentioned it before, a perimeter-oriented big, right? A guy who feels comfortable playing at the three-point line. But I think he's not like a guy who's going to stand out there and chuck up a whole bunch of threes. I think what makes him so interesting is that he's got a really good handle. He's got good feel, moving through traffic. He's kind of got that dancing bear feel to him. He'll kind of step through the lane, euros, spin moves, hook shots, where he can kind of, he'll start with the ball on the perimeter and work his way to the basket. And he's just really smart about the way he moves, how he can play in space, how he can take advantage of bigs who are running at him. I really like his overall game. I don't think he's much of a defender. I don't know if he's going to be a guy who's going to be a starting center on a team that has a really good defense. But I think, with today's NBA, and you see all of these big guys with all of these different skill sets, I think he brings a unique, kind of approach at the center position, a guy who can attack the basket, who can play in pick and roll, play dribble handoff, and just feel really comfortable out there. I think that's where a lot of people you see are falling in love with him, because as that three-point shot improves, he's going to be an even bigger threat out there.
A lot of people have talked about, from the things that I've read and what you just discussed a little bit too, is the versatility that he has offensively. I think one of the things I noticed on the video of him that I didn't realize until I started watching a little bit more is what kind of a passer he is. It seems like he just has kind of that international big guy feel for the game as well. As we get into some of the projections or pro comparisons for him, we'll see one of the names on this list fits that description very well as far as Alperen Şengün. Some of the other names that I saw were Naz Reid, Andre Blatche, DeMarcus Cousins, and Zach Randolph. Which of those comparisons do you like the most for Derik Queen?
Yeah, I'm going to be a caricature of myself at all times, Jimmy, so I got to bring it to my guy, Boogie Cousins. I would say he's DeMarcus Cousins minus the Puerto Rico Malice in the Palace. I don't know if we can talk about that on this pod. But no, I think obviously Boogie had more of an explosive offensive game. Right, Boogie was a guy who could make 5 threes in a game, or he can get 50 by scoring in the post. I don't know if Derik Queen would be that guy. I don't see kind of all-star potential in his future. I think Andre Blatche is another interesting comparison for him. Like I said, a guy who could just play with the ball on the perimeter, could get to the basket, create shots for himself, and like Jim said, has really good vision, can see guys, can pass the ball, can make those bounce passes off back cuts, find guys in the corners. I think he's a guy. He has a very unique style of play. I think you got to find the right type of teammates to work with him. Play with guards who are willing to give up the ball. Right, a lot of these guards in the league are very ball dominant, and I don't think he'll fit in that type of system where he's just standing and watching a guy like Luka Doncic or somebody like that. But I think, if you give him the freedom to kind of do his thing, I think he can bring a lot to your offense. And I kind of wrote about this, in reference to the Pelicans potentially looking at Kaman Maluach. I think Derik Queen is another very interesting guy in this draft because of the new dynamic in the league where so many teams are playing double bigs, right? And we saw that a good amount last year with the Pels after they got Kelly Olynyk. And I think Derik Queen is the guy who would be an amazing fit in a double big scenario where he can play next to somebody like you brought up the name Alperen Şengün. Houston had a lot of success this year playing Şengün next to Steven Adams because Steven Adams did a lot of the dirty work and allowed Şengün to be that offensive dynamo. And I think Queen would really excel if he can find a situation like that.
Any Pelicans comparisons that you like?
Yeah, we already threw the Boogie one out there for sure, and I think I think it fits really well. And it's funny when I was watching him. This isn't a Pelicans guy, but I think when you see him moving around on the court, it kind of screams Karl Anthony Towns in my head for whatever reason.
Yeah,
I don't think he's as talented as Karl Anthony Towns, but I think just the way he moves on the court reminds me a lot of Cat with the long strides, his ability to finish at the rim with both hands, can throw some hook shots. I think that's the type of guy you think of, a guy who's facing the basket, can attack off the dribble, get those angles on bigger, slower guys. And I think, that's the dynamic he brings.
There was another name that I left off because I didn't want to step on your toes if this was the name that you went with, but I actually saw a website or two specifically say David West for the comparison for Derik Queen as well, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, really good one. I think that I need to see a little bit more Queen as far as being more consistent with that jump shot. I think when Pelicans fans think of David West, we think of that 18-foot elbow jumper that was like automatic with D West. I think that's the next step in Queen's game, where he's got to be a reliable jump shooter, and that's where it opens up everything else for him. But I like that one for sure. And I think, again, when we talked about D West, a pure power forward, right? And I think with Queen, I think the thing for him is kind of figuring out that 4 or 5, where he kind of fits in that scenario and where he kind of can be the best. I think that's going to be the real test for whoever drafts him.
Let's move to Egor Demin. I remember when we spoke to you earlier in this series, you talked about how among maybe some of the players that are projected to go in the top half of the lottery, that Ace Bailey was maybe one of the more polarizing guys. Seems to me, from what I'm reading, if you look at the back half of the lottery, it seems like Demin kind of fits that category as well, as far as somebody that there's very wide opinions on his projection for the NBA and what his potential is. What do you think are some of the reasons, if you can explain to people why there might be kind of just a lot of different opinions on him?
Yeah, it's funny because some folks will tell you you might have a chance to get him at 23 rather than taking him at 7. That's how some people are kind of down on him, and you kind of see him just all over the place on some of these draft boards. And I think, he's one of those guys who's a big point guard, got great vision, can really pass the ball. But, whenever we talk about these guys who can handle the ball in today's NBA, big shocker, the question is, can he shoot the ball? And I think that's the number one thing with Egor Demin is, can he shoot the ball? Can he consistently make shots? Is he a threat off the ball? And I think the thing with him that was frustrating at times is not necessarily can he shoot the ball, it's will he shoot the ball. And I think his lack of aggression is what stood out the most to me watching him at BYU. There would be so many games where he would have like 4 or 5 shots. He would have like 8 or 9 points. And, early in the draft process, this is a guy who people were consistently projecting as a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
And, I was always, and, Jim has mentioned this on the show before, whenever those guys, you see these names in the top 10, I try to keep an eye on them throughout the course of the college basketball season. So, I was watching BYU games last year, and a lot of times you would turn on the BYU game and you would see 2 or 3 guys who were like putting up buckets, and none of them were Egor Demin. And he was the guy who was this lottery projected pick, a 19-year-old with a lot of hype around him. And I think that's the big thing for him is what type of aggression he's going to play with in the NBA. At BYU, he was around some older guys. They had a talented roster. Obviously, they had a pretty decent run in the NCAA tournament. So you can understand him coming as a younger guy, wanting to defer a little bit. But I think when you come to the NBA, you're a guy who's wanting to play with the ball. You got to be a threat. And I think it's very difficult to be an on-ball guy consistently and allowing teams to go under screens or putting bigger guys on you where you can't take advantage of that.
His passing is definitely the thing that is discussed the most as far as a strength and a positive in his game. That stands out, I think, as well in the video. When you watch him, he seems more like a traditional point guard who's kind of seeing the floor and trying to get other people involved. When I go through the comparisons of veteran players in the NBA, I kind of had to laugh because it's such a strange collection of players if you look at it. I mean, for one thing, he has the distinction, I think, of being the first player I've ever seen where one of the pro comparisons is Svi Mykhailiuk. That's just not a name that you see very often. But the other guys that I saw listed were it was difficult really to find a lot of comparisons for him, because there were a lot of them were Josh Giddey. I saw some that were Anthony Black, and then I saw 1 or 2 that were Joe Ingles as well. But among that group of 4 guys, which ones do you think stands out to you?
I think Giddey is the one that you're kind of hoping he can project out to be. Right? And I think with Giddey, when you saw him come into the league, he still played with a level of aggression where the jump shot wasn't there, but he was getting to the paint consistently.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's the strength of Giddey's game, where he knows how to use his body. He can use his shoulder to get into guys, get into the paint, and he's spraying out to the perimeter. I think that's always been the strength of Giddey's game. Obviously, he's a great passer, and I think that's what you want to see out of Demin, even if it's not a high-volume three-point guy, just being more aggressive in the way he plays the game. And I think that's the thing that I'm always going to bring up with him. It's not necessarily can he shoot, it's will he shoot. That's what I'm always say about him. And I think that's a real concern for some teams, is bringing in a younger guy who wants the ball. Can you really depend on him? And if not, what do you really have in that guy, right? What role can he really play if he's not a guy who's going to have the ball? And I think that was kind of what led to Josh Giddey being moved away from Oklahoma City, because they had other guys that needed the ball, right? They got Jalen Williams who can go get 40 in Game 5 of the NBA Finals, so we don't have time to be giving the ball to Josh Giddey all the time.
Right.
And I think that's the question about Egor, is like how much can a team really give him the ball and feel like that they're producing good offense all the time? I think that's going to be a real question.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. In OKC, clearly needed more guys that were just spot-up shooters that could play off the ball. And when those guys are rolling, OKC is pretty much unbeatable when they have the Cason Wallaces and the Lou Dorts knocking down threes. Any Pelicans comparison? There's actually a guy that Demin reminds me a little bit of, but I'm curious to see if you pick the same name from Pelicans history.
I really thought hard about this one, and there was a name that immediately jumped into my head, but I felt bad about it, and I'm going to just go ahead and say it. I think he reminds me a lot of Tomas Satoransky when he first got in the league.
Yeah.
And I think the Pels fans have very bad memories of the Tomas Satoransky.
Yeah, his Pelican stint was his worst NBA stint of the different teams they played for by far. Yeah.
I think the difference is I think Satoransky's probably a better athlete than Demin. I think people forget Satoransky had some crazy dunks, early in his career when he was playing for the Wizards and the Bulls.
Yep.
Demin's not quite that explosive, but I think that's what you're looking at as a big guard who can make plays, get into the paint, find shooters on the perimeter. That's what you really want. The issue with Satoransky is like what we've been talking about. I think that, I was the guy consistently tweeting when Satoransky was here in New Orleans. He was one of the top guys in the NBA with minutes played and fewest field goal attempts.
Right.
And I think that's where you get concerned about these guys, where they can kind of get lost in the shuffle. If you're not a consistent on-ball guy or you're not a consistent three-point shooting guy, then who are you in today's NBA? I think that's going to be a big thing for any of these guards coming in. You got to really establish what your role is going to be.
It's interesting. I feel like Satoransky came through here at almost the exact time too, where the guys who don't attack at all as point guard, that just try to distribute and aren't perceived as a threat or aren't guarded that closely. That was kind of the point of the NBA where it started to become a lot bigger of a problem in terms of those guys aren't as playable as they used to be. But quickly, the name that I actually thought of a little bit, and this guy's bigger than the player I'm going to mention, but I thought of Gravis Vasquez a little bit in terms of just that distributing point guard. He's pretty methodical. I think Demin is definitely more athletic than Gravis was, but maybe just kind of he reminds me of him a little bit in terms of his approach, of just that he's not looking for his shot as much. He's a lot more trying to get other guys involved and just scanning the floor, just that old school point guard.
Yeah, that kind of lends to your point that, we really don't see that archetype of point guard in the NBA as much. Like, we don't see the Rondos or, the Andre Millers or these type of guys. It's a different type of league now. We see guards, with a different level of explosion as far as being able to produce offensively. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how Egor kind of fits into today's NBA. But I think, this was similar to the conversation we had when we talked about Jeremiah Fears on the pod, right? Where you don't see many guys like that in today's NBA. So I think with any of these guys coming in, I think it's going to be an interesting challenge for them just to figure out, what they can do to be productive in today's NBA with the way the game is played now.
Yeah, our guy Elfrid Payton is also trying to keep that prototype in the league and did a good job this season when he had chances to play of being that pass-first guy that I love to watch.
Will, one of the things that I thought was interesting in hearing you and Andrew go over these prospects during our exercise here of getting Pels fans ready for the NBA draft is I feel it's a two-parter. First, do you feel like me? I think at 7, the very least, there's going to be a good player. There's going to be a player that can come in and help the Pelicans. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I think Fears maybe not as much year one, but I think I'm with you that they're going to get somebody good at 7. I would say the top 7 or 8 prospects in this draft, you feel pretty good about getting any of those guys.
Yeah, I guess the reason I feel that way is, right, because Jim, we all felt it the day after the lottery. Like, I don't know if people were hoping to be up in the top, but, you hear a 7, like, oh, no one's going to get. So I guess it's been not even a pleasant surprise, but just it's good to hear people that watch games, have followed these prospects, are talking to people in and around the league at the combine, what they've seen, is that you're going to get an NBA player or a guy that may project to at least be able to help you. So that's good. The other thing I find interesting, too, in doing this process, Will, is this. Dallas, San Antonio, Philly, Charlotte, Utah, Washington, New Orleans. That's your top 7. We know this. 5 of those 7, though, weren't they playoff teams just a year or season ago? And injuries kind of are the reason why they're picking where they are right now. So I find it interesting because, to me, one of my themes is fit. What's crazy about this draft is other than 1 and 2, from that point on, it's that team fit. And what guy's going to fit with them with a team that primarily has a playoff caliber roster, right? Perhaps.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, we talked so much during the series about, comparing these teams and wanting to shape your decisions around what we've seen from Oklahoma City and the Indiana Pacers, right? And learning from what these teams have done to get to this point. And I think one of the big things we talked about previously is that these teams have an established identity, right? When the Pacers go into the draft, they know what type of player they want. When the Thunder go into the draft, they know what type of player they want. They know what type of skill set, how those guys are going to play within their system. I think that's going to be the big question when you're talking about these teams who are not consistently playoff teams that are in the top 5, where you're talking about Washington or Utah or New Orleans. It's about being able to bring in guys who can help you establish what that identity is going to look like going forward, how your team is going to play, how are these guys going to fit in. And that's when you can start talking about being like Indiana, building depth. Because I think that's going to be the goal for a lot of these teams where in the previous decade, I think a lot of teams are talking about, we got to get a star. We got to get a star. We got to get a star. And I think in the next decade, we're going to hear a lot of teams talking about, we got to get some depth. We got to get a 7th, 8th, 9th man that we feel good about throughout the course of the season where we can last. Because I think the pace that the game is played at now, the speed that the guys are playing with, the defensive intensity on certain nights, it's very hard to just put that on 1 or 2 guys every single night and expect them to be at that level through June. And I think as great as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been, and they put a whole lot on his shoulders, you saw the reason that they're on the verge of winning the NBA Finals right now is because Jalen Williams got 40 in Game 5, right? And you need to be able to just lean on other guys. It can't just be your stars, and you need to be able to establish an identity where everything comes together. And I think that's going to be the real interesting thing about the Pelicans. What they do with 7 and 23 is how Joe Dumars kind of lays out what he wants that identity to look like at the start of his tenure. I think, it's one of the more fascinating things going into this draft.
Somewhere right now, my dad is doing a Tiger Woods Sunday fist bump or fist pump. Based off of what you said it almost seems like teams get this will have to build a basketball team again. Imagine that instead of just a big 3 or something of that nature. I'm with you. I just think with the CBA and all that, Jim and I have talked a lot about this over this process as well. You need guys that can come in and help. I mean, whether it's injury, whether it's a CBA, you're going to have a handful of guys that can come in and play basketball on a game-in, game-out basis.
No doubt. That's the way the game is now, and that's the way the CBA is forcing you to build out. And I think a huge thing for all of these teams is being able to hit on these draft picks, right? Because these are guys who are coming in on cheaper contracts. The younger players, you can develop them. So I think the stress now is higher than ever to make the right picks with these draft picks, to bring in the right type of guys, to put them in a system that can bring the best out of them. Because if you don't, then you're kind of searching around in the free agent pool trying to find guys. And I think that's going to be more difficult than ever because free agency don't hit the same the way it used to a decade ago.
Yeah,
right?
it's almost non-existent this year.
Extensions.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all going to be watching the free agency show in a couple weeks, and it's going to be like, hey, man, Miles Turner's already gone. LeBron just resigned. James Harden just resigned. There's going to be a whole lot of re-signed. Because, really the way you make moves in today's NBA is through trades and the draft. Mm-hmm. That's how you build up your roster. And, again, I'm going to go back to the finals. Look at how those teams are built. It was pretty much trades in the draft. And I think that's where the pressure on your front office, it really rises.
Yeah, I think some of these 4-hour shows that NBA TV and ESPN have scheduled for, July 1st or June 30th, the night before, are going to be 3 hours and 45 minutes of trade rumors and discussions about that. So, which is fine. I think people are excited to just see some moves and some splashes, which I think we've already seen one of them happen, and I'm sure there'll be more. So it's going to be interesting, even if free agency definitely is kind of a dormant thing now, where it's like teams don't even let their big, huge superstar guys go into free agency. It's like when you have 1 year left, you're kind of either extending or getting traded at this point. So that's where we're at as far as it's not the same as it used to be when we saw the decision and some of the other huge Kevin Durant saying it's my time and stuff like that. So.
And here's the other thing, guys. It's not guaranteed that that's going to work, right? I would say as of late, a lot of the quote unquote bigger trades, bigger moves, they didn't result into championships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I mean, the guy we'll be hearing about a lot over the next couple of days, Kevin Durant, right? Mm-hmm. Huge trade a couple years ago. So Phoenix pulling him in. We were talking about them as a potential, contender in the West, and it was a big old dud, right? And now Phoenix is scrambling, where a lot of people were complimenting them for pulling off that Durant trade a couple years ago. So you're right. It's a huge risk whenever you kind of jump into that pool, and if it doesn't work, it sets you back a couple years.
And it's funny too that Game 6 is Thursday night. As we record this, if you think about it, probably the biggest move related to Oklahoma City if they win the championship is going to be a free agency / trade that happened involving Paul George, where Oklahoma City wasn't even the prominent part of that move, but they end up getting SGA as a result of it. So it is funny how the way things work out, that it just doesn't always seem like it ends the way that it's going to, that you expect it to be, and I think that's a perfect example of that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And what the Paul George also helped build the Pacers, right? Because Paul George got traded from Indy as part of the deal that brought in Sabonis, and then Indy turned around and traded Sabonis for Tyrese Halliburton. Shout out to Paul George for helping us get this great NBA. I've been a great NBA finalist, so shout out to Paul George.
It really has.
And I would also say a new key part about these NBA free agency shows is apparently now we need to talk about crime rates in certain cities.
Oh yeah,
that's important.
Memphis.
Shout out to ESPN for really lifting up the discourse.
Yeah.
I'll end on this. It's been a fun kind of exercise here as we get ready for the draft. Jim, pop quiz for you. My kid gets it every now and then. Ready? Pop quiz. I really loved what you did with the player comps when it comes to the Pelicans and Hornets back in the day. We've heard Vasquez's name a couple times. Will Guillory, known as a spot-up shooter, likes to shoot beyond the arc. Give me a Pelicans comp of Will Guillory.
Wow. He did talk about putting me on the spot.
Right.
Talk about, I've only seen tape of Will Guillory, so I'm going to use that as a little bit of an excuse, but what do you think, Will?
About final season of Peja?
What about instant grits? Is that right? What about Jimmer Fredette?
I would say more Jimmer than Instant Grits because you're not going to see me dribbling a whole lot. Instant Grits was a guy who can make some plays off the dribble.
Right, he'd pull up.
Not so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm a big fan of the lack of passes from Instant Grits. That definitely fits the Will Guillory profile. Not a whole lot of passing on my part.
Okay.
I'm not mad at that. When a mixer between Jimmer, a little bit of Crawford.
Okay.
I would throw in maybe. I'm not mad at Peja, bad back Peja. Can't move around as much.
Yep, that's what I was thinking
That's
of. Yeah.
probably some Will Guillory in there. Yeah, not playing a whole lot of defense on this end. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good comp.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, we see him occasionally. We will see him, obviously, during the draft. Well, we will do our best, and feel free. If you see me and Jim kind of talking and Joe Dumars' his head shaking left or right furiously, it's us asking if we can get the basketball games going again. Walk up, and then we'll pile on. We'll be able to look, here's Will. Will wants to play. We'll try to get these games going again so Jim can actually see you in person.
I think we need to work on the sales pitch here a little bit, Gus. But I like where you're going with that.
Why not?
Yeah.
Let's do it, man. All right, man. Will, as always.
Figure it out.
Yep, we appreciate the time, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much, man, for helping Pels fans and us, and especially me, to find out who these guys are and what could be out there when the Pels select now at 7 and at 23. Thank you, man.
Appreciate you guys.
Our thanks to Jason Smith and Will Guillory. All right, Jim, all that remains now is the NBA draft. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about that right before we get going and then afterwards to break this down. But I guess let's just do this quick to wrap up, and we'll talk more in detail as we get closer and after the draft. But do you feel better from when we first started this, before we started looking at Dallas? At least I do. Like, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. It was a downer, right? I mean, I'm not saying you probably wanted Flag or getting in, but when the lottery happens and you're 7th, you're like, okay, after that season. Let's just be honest.
Right.
But I feel like at least there's going to be a player that maybe some fans may like and has a shot. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think as we've gotten closer to the draft, it's kind of crystallized for me that the lottery was really about the top 2 spots. It feels like after that, from 3 through, 8 or 9, it's not that much of a difference. It does seem like the Mavericks and the Spurs pulled off a huge coup by being in those top 2 spots, but I don't think that there's necessarily a huge difference after that. Obviously, the Sixers were fired up because they got the 3rd pick, and there was a possibility that they wouldn't have a pick at all, so that was a massive victory as well. But back to your main point, I think we've seen, as we've looked into some of these draft picks, that the chances of get somebody that you can really be excited about going into next season is pretty high. And also, I want to mention, too, before we go, that Tuesday we will have a draft preview roundtable that will feature Andrew Lopez and John DeShazer. Both of those gentlemen have confirmed that they will be available. Nice. So be ready for that on Tuesday, the day before Wednesday's first round of the draft.
Sounds good. As always, appreciate you for tuning us in, and let's see what takes place. The NBA draft is right around the corner. Thank you, as always, for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcast. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.